Sohini's book, and I'm going to start with making a pitch. And I hope I'm not going to ask Sohini about the day I became a runner. I'm not going to ask her why. I'm not going to ask her how. She has detailed that really well in the first 30 pages of this book. And I expect all you lovely people to buy a copy and read it, okay? So let's get to it then. Before we get to the discussion itself, I want to read a paragraph from the first chapter, just to sort of give you all a taste of what this book is about. Is there anything for which women are seen as having a legitimate reason to put themselves out there in the world? The answer I have come up with is sport. Sport enables citizens to perform their patriotism. The high nationalism of sport bestows a certain license to women to put themselves out there in the world in a way that almost nothing does. In particular, I chose to look at running because it is a basic, full-body, minimal equipment sport. It doesn't need a team. You can run on your own. It is also public in a way that swimming, also basic, full body, minimal equipment, is not. Swimming takes bodies out of view. Running puts bodies on view. So, as you might have gathered, it is about running. So, the question I want to ask Sohini is that she's profiled a series of path-breaking women runners through the ages in her book. It goes from Mary D'Souza to Santi Soundarajan and Lalita Babar. I want to ask Sohini why you picked these women, and why exactly did you pick these women? And did you have other runners running shoulder to shoulder to these women you have picked and who you may have dropped in the last instant? If so, why, who?
First of all, I just want to say it's a great honor to be in conversation with Prajwal, one of the OGs in women's sports writers. So I'm so thrilled that the BLF did this for me. Also, you made me sound really good. Your reading was wonderful. So running is my way of looking at citizenship. To me, this is a book about citizenship. And every sports book, I feel, every book on sport is a book or is a story of nationalism, is a story of citizenship. I say this very, very briefly. I would say that if you look at the high noon of nationalism is the turn of the 20th century, and that is also the time when organized sport comes into being. So 1896, we have the first edition of the modern Olympics. 1904, FIFA comes into being. 1911 or 12, the International Tennis Association. Well, Prajwal is the person to ask this. 1911 yes. or 12, the International Tennis Association sets up its rules.
Yes.
So as momentum is gathering for World War I, 1914 to 18, we already see nations lining up on the sports field. So which is why I say, to me, sport is about nationalism, sport is about citizenship. So running is my way to look at citizenship. I wanted to tell a story about India. I feel like all the stories about India are the stories of famous men. So I wanted to tell a story about India through the lives of women, about women's citizenship, and my lens was obviously sport because of the reason I just outlined. And so from the beginning, to me, this was a book about, I wanted to tell a story about India. So I began this book about 10 years ago, 9 years ago. So I wanted to pick athletes who represented roughly 8 decades. So that was broadly the thinking. So Mary D'Souza is part of the first Indian team to send women to the Olympics. And then I have Kamaljeet Sandhu, who is the first Indian woman to win an individual gold outside India. Then Usha, of course. Then I have Shanti, Soundarajan, Pinky Pramanik, and Duti Chand in the second section of the book. The book is broadly, in my mind, 3 sections. So first section is these early pioneers. The second section is, so Shanti, Pinky, Duti are all women who are called out for not being women enough. So this is actually a period just between 2006 to 2014. So, but the reason I wanted to tell all their stories was because, so Shanti, very briefly, one of the finest middle distance runners in India, wins 12 international medals, gets the silver at the 2006 Asiad at Doha, and then is promptly erased because she fails her sex test. She's the first athlete after compulsory testing is banned. So sports has this long and disturbing history of sex testing only of women, female athletes. First athlete to be tested after compulsory testing is stopped. Dumped like a defective toy. Then we have Pinky Pramanik, who's accused of rape by her roommate, her flatmate. She wins her case in the Calcutta High Court. And then we have Duti Chand, who's called out for too much testosterone. And so the government of India actually decides to go to the Court of Arbitration in Sport in Lausanne, which is pretty much the Supreme Court of Sport, defend her, and she wins the case. And so briefly for a while, she changes Olympic rules. So in 2016, there was no testing on the basis. I have to be very, very precise because sex testing is based on very, very precise science. So, so on the basis of that criteria, testing did not take place. Those criteria did not hold for the 2016 Rio Games. So she changed Olympic history in that way. So I felt, although it is just 8 years, the needle has moved from Shanti to Duti. And the final section of my book is about long distance running. It is about the marathon, the neoliberal marathon ecosystem that has come, and very much a post-liberalization story for India. I tell the story of Lalita Babar, who is the first Indian woman to qualify for an Olympic track and field final after Usha. So 84 and then 2016 Rio, so 32 years. In medical terms, mostly people will say 25 to 30 years is a generation. She comes exactly after one generation. I have a story about the Sunrise Project, which is a long-distance training school for rural kids in Nanded in Marathwada area of Maharashtra. And I end with the story of Ila Mitra, who could have been the first Indian origin woman at the Olympics. She was supposed to have represented India in British India in the 1940 Olympics, which were cancelled for World War II, became a Communist Party member, became a leader of the Tebhaga movement, which is an important peasant movement in India, was raped in custody, came out of that, became MLA for West Bengal. And I wanted to end with Ila Mitra. So my book is mostly chronological, but I end with the story of the 1930s and 1940s, because I was writing this during 2020 when the images in the media, in the social media as well, were all very reminiscent to me. I'm a Bengali, so the 1940s are a devastating decade for India in general, but especially for Bengal, because you have the Bengal famine. Of course, we think of it as the decade we became independent, but it's actually an incredibly difficult decade. You have the Bengal famine, you have partition, and then Gandhi is assassinated. So I wanted to tell a story. I wanted to end with a note of hope that things can go from ruin to something better than that. So I end with Ila Mitra. So the reason I chose them is because I felt like they represent the stories of India broadly. And I think I left out some really, really good athletes only because, I had to, that the nature of the project was exclusionary in a way.
So Sohini, you were talking about hope. So let's just go right back to hope. Hope was a four-letter word in Indian sport in the 1980s. So I'm going to read once more, and that's not because Sohini cannot read, but I feel a likeness to the scene that she has so beautifully recreated and brought to life, really. It is the first paragraph of the 4th chapter of her book, and it is titled The Woman Who Came Forth. If you do not know who she is, please buy another copy and educate yourself.
Thank you, Prajwal. You're really selling my book.
Okay. When I was 4, I used to run with Pilavila Kandi Tekkeperambil Usha, India's greatest woman sprinter, every weekend. I would wait for after Spider-Man on Saturdays and He-Man on Sundays, and she would appear glistening in the rain, deer bounding in the foreground, and holding up a flaming torch in her right hand. I would run circles around my living room, pacing my steps with the music. In my hand, I had a plastic maze, the closest thing I possessed to a flaming torch. It looked a bit like a torch too, the top red and rounded, and the handle white. I don't know if I loved running then, but Usha was the only woman I knew who ran. And when she appeared, deer leaping around her beautiful arcing strides, it felt like a call. As much as all of us who worship at Usha's altar like to think she was alone, Usha was not alone. She heralded a herd of champions, especially from Kerala. MD Valsamma, Rosa Kutti, Shiny Wilson, who incidentally won the gold medal in the Asian track and field in 1989 when pregnant, long before Serena Williams did that on a tennis court in Australia. So Sohini, when you traveled to Kerala to meet Usha, you have a fabulous scene that you have recreated at the end. It's the last paragraph of that chapter. If you could just, from here. From here. It's the last paragraph, the last couple of paragraphs of the Usha chapter, where she actually tells us what Usha gave back to athletics, or gave to not just athletics, but to society in general. So if you can read that.
Thank you. Also just wanted to say that Valsamma actually got a medal and did better than Usha at the 82 Asian Games.
Yes.
So India's first big ticket event, sports event. There had been 4 of us running on the beach the evening I took the photo. A Labrador, 2 of his handlers, both male, and me, the only woman. All 3 men were graceful, sure-footed, and swift. They seemed to know their way about the sand. Next to them, I must have cut a comic figure, slipping and threatening to fall over at any moment, a novice on sand. Yet no one was looking at me. I know because I checked around in embarrassment every wobble I took. How freeing it had been. I wasn't an odd public sight. I was just another body on the beach. Perhaps this is the legacy of P.T. Usha, I realized later. There is a road in Calicut named after her. It houses the grandest 5-star hotel in a town with several other chic hotels and cafes. But this is her true mark in the city, that no one turns to look when a woman runs because Usha had made it so natural. I could run like the Labrador pup, tongue hanging out, hair taken over by the salty ocean breeze, gloriously delirious without checking to look back on the world.
Lovely. I think one of the really nice parts of Sohini's book is that she weaves a personal narrative right through it. It's there in the Usha chapter. It's there right through. It's like the backdrop almost, you know. So when you have the deer and the rain and everything else, there is Sohini's voice also, which is really interesting. The question I want to ask you, Sohini, is when you're writing a book like this, was it a challenge really to distance yourself from the story, or was it organic? How did that happen? Did you write many drafts? How was that process, if you can talk a little about it?
The easiest answer is that, yeah, I think I wrote about 20 drafts. So that one is easy to answer. As journalists, and you know this, Prajwal, really well, that Indian newsrooms train you to, erase yourself from the story. Get out of the story is what we are told. And this is good advice, actually. And I feel it held me in good stead during the book. So I am there, but I hope I'm not there when I shouldn't be there. When I should, so I hope, so I think that was the voice of all these editors saying, shut up, keep yourself out. But from the beginning of the book, one of the ideas that I had, and I mentioned this before, was that I wanted this to be a book about India. I wanted to tell a story about India, and one thread was obviously the relatively public thread of the relatively well-known athlete. Nobody's really well-known other than Usha and to some extent Kamaljit Sandhu and Duti Chand. But I consider myself to be a failed novelist, so I wanted to write a book that people read, because I feel with nonfiction, even the really good nonfiction is that we read a bit and then we keep it aside and then we come to another bit and then we keep it aside. I hope to write a book that people would read from beginning to end. And I thought there is that definition of a novel that Henry James gave, which is that movement from point A to B. So while one strand is the story of the nation from A to B, from 1940s to now, another strand was my story, and eventually it became my maternal grandmother's story, my mother's story, and my story. And it happened quite by chance, because when I was interviewing Mary D'Souza, Mary stays in Atlanta these days, and I was interviewing her on Zoom in the nights, and I used to live with my maternal grandmother then, and she happened to ask me, who is this person, why are you staying up at night? And I told her, this hockey player and athlete. So Mary was a double international, actually. She played hockey and ran track for India. And she's 82 now, she lives in Atlanta. And my grandmother said, she's just my age, and my grandmother is a Bombay girl. And I realized then that the two of them were probably, living within a 5-mile radius of each other, possibly crossing paths at Bombay Central Station or VT or CST. And I thought that this could be a private thread, the story of a family telling the story of a nation. So those were two thoughts that I had. How I've done that I think readers would, and you would know better, whether I've done well in keeping myself out when I need to be out. But yeah, it was a struggle. But at the same time, I thought that this is a thread that I want to have. This is another thread in the story.
Lovely. The most compelling chapters of the day I became a runner is the middle section, the chapters on Santi Soundarajan, Pinky Pramanik, and Duti Chand. They're outstanding in the detail that she's brought to the table about the way society treated her, treated these women, especially Santi. It is, you know, as journalists, for me, you look at a story and you look at a result. And often we miss the process of it, what an athlete was made to go through. And the detail with which she has dealt with Santi and all these three athletes is just fabulous. I'm going to keep Santi for later, but I want to ask you to read a very, very heartening part of these chapters. It is in the Pinky Pramanik chapter. It's about running in the night. I think if you're a woman and you run or you exercise, you almost always want to just merge with the woodwork. You don't want to stand out. You don't want to be noticed. And there was that vein in that story that she's going to read to us now. Yeah. Right after that. Yeah.
I started running at night instead. It was surprisingly easy. I would eat dinner and fall asleep, the easy sleep that rice brings, and I would wake up a few hours later on my own, as if someone had called me and said it was time. It was quiet and dark outside, the heat of the day gone, perfect for running. And the river, how black and beautiful it looked at night. At that time, I didn't feel the loneliness I did otherwise. I had a door of my own that I could open to a place where I could be myself.
5 more minutes.
I thought I was running on that red track I saw on TV and that all the students in the school and the people in the village were watching me. One night near the village, she saw a figure running towards her. She is Pinky Pramanik. She saw a figure running towards her, but she felt unafraid. "Who are you?" she asked him. "Shileth," he replied. Shileth was a boy about her own age. In fact, Pinky had seen him at school. But she didn't speak to anyone in high school, wary of being rebuffed. Shileth was a cook at her high school. They made a plan to run together. He would come by her house at night and tap lightly with his shoe outside her door. Tuk, tuk, tuk.
So she concludes that friendship later in the book. What happened to that friendship, we know later. So you can read the book for that. So we don't have much time left, so I'm going to go right to the heart of it. So I must tell you that I had a ringside seat in that whole Santi Soundarajan being discovered as working in a brick factory. And one Narayan Swami who broke the story in the Times of India, he called me. I was attending the morning edit meeting, and he said, "We have the story." So I told the editors. It was carried July 2012, if I'm not wrong. That story was published. Yes, but yeah, the headline was Asiad medalist labors at Bricklin. And there was a strap that said, "Stripped of laurels after failing sex test, Santi gets a woman's wage." So that is society for you. But before I get to the question, Sohini, I want to, the question on Santi, on why you dedicated the book to her. It's a beautiful dedication to Santi Soundarajan, who never stopped thinking of the track as her home. I want to ask you, why did you dedicate it to her and not maybe Usha?
So for me, it was obvious. I mean, Shanti has been erased from the official record. If you look up Shanti Soundarajan on YouTube, you will not find even one video of her running.
I mean, can you imagine? There is not a single video of her. I mean, is that even believable?
You'll see videos of her interviews, but yeah, she's been erased from the official record. And very briefly, 2006, she wins the silver at 800 meters Asian Games, Doha. She's on the podium, gets the medal, and then stripped of the medal internationally humiliated. She learns of it on the news. She doesn't get to know, nobody calls her. So she gets a call after that, stripped of the medal. The only thing that, and her sports career is over. The Athletics Federation of India says, that's it. The only thing she gets is that the Tamil Nadu Chief Minister of the time, Karunanidhi, gave her a 15 lakh rupee check because Tamil Nadu recognizes her as the first $1 million to win a medal at, an individual medal at the Asian Games. And what she does with that 15 lakhs is, she sets up an informal coaching academy and trains kids in her village. So she could have bought a piece of land with that and she could have done something for herself. But she does that. And so that is Shanti for she never stops thinking of the track. And when I interviewed her, I spent about a week at one go.
Sohini, I'm going to interrupt you here because we don't have much time because I want you to read the end of that chapter. So why I'm asking her to read the end of that chapter is because it is the reason why she dedicated the book to Santi Soundararajan. So she raises that image right at the very beginning of the chapter where she says, when I saw Santi from afar that first evening, I felt it too. Coach, commander, captain, the one in charge. Can you finish that image?
Yet that evening when I watched her from the gallery at the stadium training her students, I saw it again. Her squared shoulders, her poise and precisely measured movements, her sure-footed confidence, the way the young men and women in training seemed to hang on to her every word. The light was at first radiant, and then it turned gentle and slightly melancholic. Then the shadows started to lengthen, and the dogs that lived in the stadium complex crept out to the steps on the galleries, and the birds were no longer visible as they flew home. The lights in the stadium didn't come on that day. In the gloaming, as Shanti and her students trained, I could still tell her apart by the way she held herself. I thought of the ceaseless struggle she carried within her and how proudly, precisely, proprietarily she moved, the woman who had been erased on the official record. But here in this ground, in this little piece of the world she had reclaimed for herself, inch by inch over the past 10 years, she made sure that you didn't miss her. This is me, she seemed to be saying, and you have to acknowledge me.